Hi, everybody. Welcome to Sama in Seattle. I'm Derek Mazzoni, your host. Thanks for being here. It's nice to be back, actually, on this particular platform. Reminds me of a time of the pandemic where artists could not play out, and these were some of the only ways for them to actually present new music and their ideas and their stories. And I wanted to bring that back to life a bit more as we still live on many devices and continue to discover things through these particular platforms. I have a very special guest here tonight. His name is Gabbi Dluzewski. He is from a band from Sweden in Estonia called FRÄNDER. They are a evolution of a particular sound that was really quite popular in the late 90s, early 2000s. Continue doing that work. Bands such as Garmarna. In the United States, they came out on a label called Northside, which is in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And I, on my radio show at KXP, was playing a bunch of this stuff because it was a super interesting mix of traditional music from all over Scandinavia and the Baltic countries, Estonia, Latvia. And at the same time, some of the energy of metal and of rock, and it was an interesting hybrid of that, where it was one of those stories of artists rediscovering their roots, not recreating Western rock or Western metal, but actually using this music as a platform to create their own story, their own interpretation that goes back into the forests, really, really ancient times, and yet make something really new for the 21st century. And really was intoxicating, and I was really stoked to be able to play it. So we cut to 2018. I am in Montreal for a beautiful festival called Mondial. And it's cold as Montreal is because this was in the middle of January, I believe. Well, we'll talk about that later, the timing. But it was cold Montreal. And we huddle into a club, and this band, FRÄNDER, comes on, and I am transported to a different place in a different time. And I was like, okay, this is interesting. Just recently, I was at the WOMEX Festival, the World of Music Expo. It was in La Coruña in Spain, and I ran into Gabbi, I ran into FRÄNDER, and I was like, this is awesome. So we went back and forth, and it was time for us to have a conversation because their second record, FRÄNDER II, just came out. So we're going to talk to Gabbi in just a little bit. We're first going to see a performance, so you get to experience this beautiful music also. And then we'll have a chat with Gabbi. So stay tuned on Sama, Seattle Sacred Music and Art.
Vaikne öde varju vaipa, kata
welcome Gabbi.
Thank you very much.
Great to see you again.
You too. Nice to be here.
Tell me about the piece of music that we just saw.
Yeah, so the piece of music that you just saw is a song in Estonian. It's actually the only song in Estonian on the new album. It's called Õhtuõrna, which means gentle night. And it's an old, it's also the only lyric that is traditional on the new album. Everything else is original. This is an old prayer, an evening prayer, that was found, we don't really know, but 1700 maybe. Yeah, around that time anyway.
Okay, thanks for sharing it. Tell me a little bit about yourself and this band. First of all, what drew you to this kind of music? How'd you get there? Let me tell me, give me at the beginning. Like, you know, I picked up a guitar, and suddenly I felt to our conversation now.
Well, it's a longer story, or it's not a, you know, a super straight story that I can give you in 2 words.
Great,
but,
great.
So I'm raised. So first, FRÄNDER is a family band. So it's 3 siblings in FRÄNDER. It's me, my sister, and my brother. And we are raised in a music family with musician parents. But in our family, rock music was the traditional music. So that's what I'm raised with, the classic rock. The Beatles was my first band. Jethro Tull was my second band. And now I'm just speaking like 1 and 2 years old. And that was my bands. And then eventually Black Sabbath came, and Led Zeppelin, and, you know, so on. And I was very much raised a guitar player, electric guitar player. When I was a teenager, I was all into Yngwie Malmsteen and metal and fast guitars. But I've always been interested in mixtures, fusions, new sounds, new ways of expression, expressing yourself. And then my brother Daniel, he was studying, he's a bit older than me, and he brought me to a spelmansstämma. And spelmansstämma is a festival, a typical Swedish traditional festival. But the thing with spelmansstämma, and this is a recommendation for all of you, if you come to Sweden in summertime, you need to go and find a spelmansstämma, because it's a festival, but it's a festival where everyone takes part. So everyone is there to play with each other. So the biggest one is 10,000 people, and that's 10,000 people with fiddles. And they are standing on this green grass hill, and they are all playing together. Yes. And it's 1 or 2 days only fiddle music, and you find fiddle players 2 and 2 standing in the bushes playing together, and then the next corner you see 5 of them, and then 10 of them, and then 1 of them, and you know, it's crazy. It's so beautiful. And for me, that was just you know, as an electric guitar player, you're used to looking at other electric guitar players, and you're like, oh, okay, how fast can you play? And here suddenly people were playing together, and people asked me to come and join them, and you know, it was very welcoming, and also a new sound, but still not a new sound to me, because it was very home. It felt, you know, like this climate and this place, like Sweden. So I think then an interest of discovering more about this music was born, but I was still too much of a rock guy, so I was more interested in including that in my rock music than actually starting to play it. So I was still going to be a rock star and an electric guitar player, but I wanted to make music, rock music, with a Swedish traditional touch, which I also did. I had a rock band, and we were touring and releasing albums, but then suddenly that started to, you know, they started to swap places. And when I was 20 something, I decided to go all in and start studying traditional music. So now I have a bachelor in Swedish traditional music, and I've started a master's in Nordic music, and that's basically what I play nowadays. I'm a hobby electric guitar player.
Okay, so it was a big transition.
Yeah, it was, but not too much. I mean, it's still, for me, it's the same type of it's still, you know, a fiddle. I tend to listen to solo fiddle albums or duo fiddle albums. I have a few favorites, and for me that's the same. It's the same energy and the same power and attitude if it's a good player as listening to a rock album or a rock guitar player.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I get it. You know, it's just not going through an amp.
Yeah, exactly.
But let's explore this a little bit, because this is something that's been going on that I'm seeing throughout the world. And I was born in Poland under communism. I left before the wall came down, but I remember the party packaging all of this traditional music and having to go, putting on my little red kerchief and going to these, like, with the school, to these cultural shows. And it was all the village music being presented. There was always, like, you know, some kids in front and they're singing. And it was this, you know, this is your music. We are one people coming together. It was like something that everybody put together. Once the wall came down, all of the kids were like, fuck that. I want nothing to do with that. I want to sound like The Cure or The Smiths, or, you know, I want to sound like a rock band. It was fine for a while. Then it kind of felt, you know, this is what I'm echoing things that artists have told me. It just felt kind of fake. It wasn't who they were. They were mimicking something else. And then bands like Warsaw Village Band comes to mind as one of the first ones, went back to the villages and started to really know what that music was about, you know, really discover their roots. But not in a way where it's like, okay, we're going to mimic the elders. It was more like, let me reinterpret this in my own way. I'm living in this year, you know, there's no going back. And create my own interpretation as a musician of this sound. And then I started seeing this in different parts of the world. And I'm curious if you have this story, if this is part of your, I mean, obviously you didn't grow up in communism, etc., but this particular reinterpretation or finding yourself in these roots, finding yourselves in, like you talked about this festival in the forest of Sweden. Sweden is mostly forest. So how do you connect with this? How do you find yourself in this particular space? You know, there's a resurgence of pagan bands and other things. I'm just curious, is like, how do you from Sabbath and Malmsteen suddenly come into this thing and play something that's really ancient? And how does that how does that fit into the story of your story of Sweden, Estonia, Poland, and the other parts that make up who you are?
I don't have it. Yeah, that's a short answer. It's not the same because they did that. So the generation that had the similar experience, like Warsaw Village Band, going to the villages, trying to relearn the music and reinterpret the music, that happened in the 60s, 70s, and 80s here in Sweden. So it started small in 60s, continued in 70s, and then boomed in the 80s. So I came much later into this, and everything was, you know, there basically. Garmana had already done theirs, and Hedningarna and Ale Möller, and so now we have a different situation where we have to like try hard to take another step forward or another step in another direction, which is in many ways very hard, I would say, because there are so much that is already done, and you know, the clear the natural boom that happened in Poland much later in Poland, but with Warsaw Village Band, and now it's still happening in a way. That boom is long gone in Sweden. I mean, folk music is back to being not very interesting to normal people. Yeah, so I got really carried away by the sounds and the loneliness. I mean, there is traditionally it's a lot of solo playing in Swedish music, solo and duo playing. And I've really tried to penetrate the tradition. I've really tried to learn the tradition and like not starting out with interpreting and kind of just do my own thing with the music. I've tried to really learn, like studied from the masters, studied the the old guys, like archive recordings, all of that stuff. I've done that. And I think that is very important. I tend not to like, actually, or I mean, it depends, but generally I tend not to like bands that come and just, they've heard a polska and then they think, oh, let's do something with this, and they know nothing, and I can hear right away, like, okay, they've heard one polska, they liked it and it was cool to them, great, but they haven't really learned. And for me, that that is not going deep enough to me. So for me that was very important, and I got also very, very stuck into this. So I got stuck into the tradition and stuck into the solo playing. So I didn't forget, but kind of stuffed away my rock background and my like the whole way of thinking and composing and trying to make up new things, and that was like stuffed away for a while when I was only trying to mimic the tradition, and in that way really learn the tradition. It might seem like a long step or a big step from Malmsteen and Sabbath, but in a way I still think it's the hearing this solo fiddle player like sitting by himself in his house playing these really romantic and heavy and crooked polskas. It's really cool.
You make it sound really, really interesting. Really intoxicating.
It is very, very cool. But then we have to do something new with it, right? We have to, like, in the end, I can't mimic them. I can't, especially since I don't play fiddle, right? I play these instruments or those instruments. So that forces me to kind of be innovating all the time. So even when I was mimicking, I was still innovating because I can't sound like a fiddle on these instruments. So I was inventing stuff and ways of playing and ways of handling the tradition, which I didn't really, it wasn't really something I was focusing on because I was focusing on learning. But then when I started focusing on, okay, now it's time to really like develop this and try to make something new and combine my rock background with the trad present, then things started to happen and become very interesting, I think.
Do you remember the time when it was like, wait, this is interesting? I'm suddenly, like you felt like you had that moment, because most musicians have that when you're like mimicking, just copying, covers, and suddenly you find your voice.
Yeah.
And then you're like, wait a second, there's something here that I want to explore.
Yes, I think in a way I had a voice all the time because even though I mentally stuffed away my rock background and my way of thinking and innovating and composing, I've always heard, like, whatever I play, people always come up to me and say, oh, I can really hear that you have been playing rock music. That is impossible to hide. Like for me, it has been impossible to hide. I don't know if it's the look or if it's actually the playing. I've always wondered, but still.
Well, you got to look. You definitely,
Yeah.
You've chosen to hold on to that part. You're not out there like. You're still ready to do that particular metal show if needed.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. But I do remember. So with the first album, I'm seamlessly going into FRÄNDER. So with the first FRÄNDER album, it was very important to us. This was released 2017, so the year before we met the first time. Mm-hmm. So it was very important to us to be and for me to be a folk music band. I really wanted to show both to myself but also to other people that I know this tradition. I know folk music, Swedish folk music. And then we did this album. It's a great album, and the album actually took us around the world. So we were touring a lot with this album, but on the road we started discussing and speaking and analyzing, because I walked up on the stage every night and I was like, yeah, Okay, let's do it. Now I'm ready. Like let's how do you say, like, yeah, just run over the audience, because that kind of energy was the energy that I was used to have with a rock band. And then I was watching these performances afterwards, and I was like, but what's wrong here? Like, we are not that cool. This is not very cool. I mean, this is beautiful and sweet and like it's groovy and nice, but it's not that cool. And then we started discussing, like, you know, everything. Like, who are we? What do we come from? What do we have that we want to say? So how do we expect ourselves to sound? Like, I had an expectation that we were going to sound cool and big, and I was wondering, why do not the festivals put us main stage prime time? Like, you know, all those things. And I was still had one foot in the rock world and in my you know, my teenage rock dream ego thing.
Yeah.
But with this talk and with these shows, we both, I think, we became a better band with the first album, because we started to accept what we sounded like.
Yeah.
But we also started to walk the path that we are walking now, and the path that I think we have. It's an interesting path that we have started to walk, because it feels like we have something very special to say and to share and to create. And it's also, as you mentioned in the beginning, it's a path that kind of, I mean, it started with Hedningarna and Garmarna and those Hovendroven, but it's completely different.
Yeah. It's, you're a different band. You're a different generation.
Yes.
And you're also, you know, the fact that you've been touring, that of course changes you. And the biggest part is that you actually decided to release another record. And a lot of times bands just do the one record, and that's all they do. That's all they have. So you've got, the story continues. Let's do a bit of an acknowledgement right now. The musicians that are on the record. We've got Säde Tatar on flute, bagpipes, and jaw harp. Yes.
Yes. Also my wife.
Your sister Natasja Dluzewski on vocals and fiddle. Yourself, Gabbi Dluzewski, on Swedish lat mandola. What is a lat mandola?
So it's wrong way. That one. That's a låt mandola, and it's låt mandola is tune mandola, so it's made to play tunes on.
Okay, perfect. And your percussion and vocals. Your brother Daniel Dluzewski on bass and vocals. Björn Tollin on percussion. Andreas Berglund on additional percussion. And Walter Kinbom on darbuka and aluda. So you continue with your work, and you're working with other bands also. You released an EP with the Polish band Sutari, who we're big fans of here, of Haraman Sama. And you're combining different sounds and different ideas from around the region. Now, this is the interesting part that I do need to bring up, is that you know, 150 years ago, people didn't travel much. Even though, you know, Estonia and Sweden were, you know, right now it's like a minute, you didn't go. It was dangerous to kind of like, hi, I am from Estonia, I am here in Sweden to play music for you. And even Poland, all that, it was very, you know, it was, you went, people wanted to know what was going on over there because it was so far away. You are playing with other musicians. You are representing not just Sweden, you're representing Estonia, you're representing Poland, you're representing the whole region. And in a context when you're touring the world, you know, it's like, what is that like? You know, because you're not just like a band like the Hives, just played here recently. Great band, you know, rock band doing their own thing. Doesn't make me interested about Sweden at all. I learned nothing about Sweden and listening to the Hives or Franz Ferdinand or any of the bands. They're great rock bands, but they don't tell me anything about, you know, the history of the place. I'm not saying that every band should, because, you know, I'm a nerd and so I want you to do that. But others will be like, no, I just want to play rock. Fine. But you are talking, you're presenting something that goes deeper. What's that like? So two answers, like, what's that like? And two, what is that like when you're playing in a different country, and you know that you're doing that?
We have been speaking a lot in the discussions that started on tour. We started analyzing also rock bands, and we started analyzing folk bands and the folk scene in Sweden and the folk scene in Estonia and Poland, like trying to because as I also said in the beginning, like my bands was and is the Beatles and blah blah, Black Sabbath, Led Zeppelin. That's 40-50 years ago. That's a long time ago now. I usually say that I don't know anything happening after the 90s. Like I don't know my generation's music. So I started I'm serious. So I actually did like in this whole process I started to do a big journey, a discovery journey when I started to listen to Lady Gaga and whatever their names are, like all the big ones today. And from the 90s, trying to analyze like why did this get big and what do people like about this, and how can we try to make, like how can we be like present like today, a band of today. Like we can't make music that is based on music that is was happening 50 years ago if we want to be present. Like you get the point. But we haven't really been discussing the fact that rock bands, we are all British American rock bands. No matter where we are from, we are still a British American rock band. We don't speak
Western culture.
Yeah, that's true. And strange. I wonder what would happen if a rock band like the Hive started like promoting Sweden or speaking about Sweden and telling their audience about Sweden. That would be interesting, I think.
I think it would be. It would be. But if you go to Sweden right now, you have to find it. That festival that you talked about. Tell me the name of the festival again, with all the fiddle players.
Well, Spelmansstämma. It's like there are so many of them. It's just
But that tells you something about Sweden, because you have to go in there, and Sweden isn't a complicated country with a phenomenal history, and it's tied to that history is intriguing. But obviously, it's one of the great European empires. Obviously, it didn't colonize Africa, and so it doesn't have that legacy. But it has a interesting story. But it is also part of the Western canon, shall we say? It's a Christian country.
Yeah.
And it is going to be, that the interesting things about Sweden need to come from a band like you. The Hives. What are the Hives going to do? Are they going to?
I mean, they can
talk about. They can talk about the cities and what's going on.
Well,
there.
They can talk about the music scene. I mean, the rock scene and the pop scene in Sweden is also flourishing in its own special or specific way. I mean, so, I mean, there are things to speak about.
It's huge. In many ways, it is pop. If you're looking at Lady Gaga, this is a weird pivot of the show, but I'll go with it. If you're looking at Gaga and like Childish Gambino and Robin and these huge stars, this is pop music. It's kind of like it's going to Korea and and suddenly you discover K-pop. But it's like, I know that K-pop is all over the world.
Yeah.
The same thing. The producers and the artists that are doing there, but it's not. It doesn't tell me anything about the history, the culture of Sweden. But then again, I'm not sure, because I might be trying to reframe this story. I hope to be in Sweden sometime in 2024. And I might have a completely different perspective once I'm there. But it is that particular thing that happens with pop music. Like, if you dig down into Spotify, a Swedish company, it is this particular powerful technological and cultural manifestation that is tied to everything from pop music to particular use of plugins to capitalism. All of this stuff is working right now, but it doesn't go Spotify doesn't tell me anything about the history and the legacy of what's going on in Sweden from
No, of course.
but I'm a nerd. I would look
Yeah.
at it from an ethnomusicological, anthropological perspective. Like, how does that work? But if you were to say, the impact for your generation's musical lexicon worldwide, Sweden is right in there, from the technology to the production to the distribution of this thing.
Yeah, but I'm
So
just
when is Spotify goddamn going to put up a whole bunch of FRÄNDER and other bands that are representing
Sweden. No,
Sweden.
that's a good. Yeah. No, good points and interesting. If someone would dare to do something like that, that would be very interesting.
You're 2 degrees removed from somebody who can make a decision by just basically sending out one text, and then suddenly you're on the front page, the FRÄNDER playlist. I mean, a lot of that has to do with like, all right, you're a band, you make great music, but you also got to do that pushing at the same time.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
Sorry, that's a weird pivot.
Yeah,
so you're
no.
discovering my viewers and listeners are like, okay, that makes sense, but what are we doing here?
What are we doing here?
So Gabbi, let's pivot back again. But I do want you to do that, because it would be interesting in a context of like, not saying nationalism, suddenly Sweden has to become nationalistic. The last time they did that, it wasn't very good. Talking about the 1700s.
Yeah.
And the big deluge.
Well, they are very, very, they are on their way, and it's not good at the moment.
Yeah, it's history. I know. It's a complicated place.
Yeah.
Within Sweden, you've got migration and various political parties, and this it's an interesting time all over Europe right now. And I'm hoping that it stays good, and then we learn from each other as human beings, because climate migration is happening, and Sweden's looking good in climate change.
You're all gonna come here one day.
Yeah, no, I live in Seattle. We're looking good too. We're on the same line, so more or less. But it is people, human beings, are going to be coming, and there's an interesting opportunity there. Like, I'm seeing interesting bands from Syria and from all over Africa that happen to make Stockholm their home.
Yeah, absolutely. We have so many good musicians here.
Yeah, and that becomes really intriguing for a band such as yourself, because it's an interesting opportunity for musicians kind of do that. There's this whole nationalistic bent, and this is our traditional music. This is what we're doing. But musicians, if they're good, they're like, I want to pick that up. There is no such thing. We're going through cultural appropriation and all that going on here. But in a context of music, the more the merrier. Bring it on.
Absolutely.
Let me learn.
Absolutely.
Let me see. And it's a great ambassador to let people kind of discover their humanity and the other's humanity in that modality. So the reason I'm bringing this whole thing up, which we just covered the entire planet here, from climate change to the anthropological music ambassadorship, is the fact that you guys are doing great work. I love playing your music on all the different channels that I'm lucky enough to have access to. But the live setting is really important, because then you're actually connecting. So let's talk about that. You're going to be at APAP, which is a great conference in New York City that happens in January, of all types of musicians from all over the world that are coming in. You guys are doing a Nordic Fest at the Scandinavian House on January 13th, which is in Midtown, for all our viewers and listeners in New York.
Yeah.
And then you'll be doing more. You'll be visiting various cities in North America, possibly.
Well, not in January. So January is only one show. It's a one show in New York, and we are bringing a bunch of Scandinavian bands with us to show you what Scandinavia is about.
Okay.
And then we are back in Canada. We're doing West Coast of Canada in July, and then we are back in US in September.
Okay,
with
great.
A bunch of shows.
Okay, you're going to send me that stuff so I could put that up on our various social media platforms, so people can know. Did you make a CD?
A CD, as in, yeah.
Okay, let's hold it up.
There it is.
Bring it up to the camera. Nicely. Center it. Yes, there it is. Sorry, we have a little bit of a lag. Awesome. FRÄNDER II. I like the design.
It's a Polish designer.
Good. Good. I mean, great. I don't know what to say about that. Represent Polska.
Yeah.
But that's awesome that you did that. Because you did that work with Sutari, and
Yes.
This is an interesting place right now. Obviously, we've been in Poland. You've got the Ukrainian population, Belarusian population. We just did a project with a few African bands that are now making Poland their home, like Ifi Uda, Afronauts, and others that'll be going out for a little bit. And I'm hoping we can do more on Sweden, or we can dig a little deeper into this work. Obviously, it'd be great to guys have you come to Seattle and put you on KXP if the timing works out, and to and to play that out so you can actually show this and make that work.
I could bring some CDs, some Swedish CDs, like what?
Yeah, you gonna do vinyl?
No, I don't think so. It's too heavy to bring.
Yeah. It's the shipping. It's an interesting place right now because you're making CDs and they make cars without CDs players. So this is a really interesting middle space. It's like, okay.
Yeah.
What are we doing here? How does this work?
Yeah. No, we would like to do vinyls, but and many people are asking, so maybe we are doing it. But we'll see.
You could do it. We'll talk about this after. But anyway, Gabby, thanks for being here, and thanks for telling your story. Thanks for watching Sama. Self-Circuit Music and Art. You can find us obviously on every single social media platform except Snapchat, because I'm just not feeling comfortable about being there right now. That could change in the future. And I hope that you will like and follow and check out the music of FRÄNDER. Obviously, they're a Swedish company, so they're a Swedish band, so going to be on Spotify and other platforms. And catch us here in just a little bit. We've got music. We got a bunch of artists coming from Lisbon, a bunch of artists coming from Poland and beyond, and catch us on the road.